Welcome to the Negotiation Society podcast, Inside My Head, with me, Jessie Lancaster, your host here in London. My guest today is Jane Shepherdson. Jane grew up in Bristol, the middle child of three, her father a professor of maths and mother a biochemist. In a home full of academics, Jane saw herself as somewhat of the odd one out, with her brother taking after her mum and becoming a scientist, and younger sister moving to America to study for an MA in creative writing. Academia wasn't as appealing to Jane's rebellious soul, and the draw of London and the world of fashion led her to North London Poly for study, an activist institution where creativity, weekend protesting, and a desire to change the world were a part of the fabric of her education. From this point on, London became home, a place she couldn't see herself leaving. Jane's career started at the London institution that is Topshop, the iconic store we all know that towers above that Oxford Circus tube station. She started right at the bottom of the ladder, worked her way up from buyer all the way through to eventually becoming the brand director in 1996. She worked under various CEOs, including John Horner, Stuart Rose, and of course, the infamous Sir Philip Green. Her successes were many, not least that she was one of the few people able to put Philip Green in his place. After 23 years at the helm of Topshop, where she increased the profit from 10 million to a staggering 100 million, she wanted to try something different. She did a year of working on smaller projects, including building Oxfam's boutique store business, but the draw of the smaller, more premium business of whistles saw her settle for a further 8 years. By 2017, it was time for another change, and after a year of Airbnb and road tripping down the west coast of America, she started to realize her passion for fashion was at odds with her desire to find a sustainable solution to the fashion problem. Despite finding lots of startups in the sustainable fashion sector, it wasn't until she met Sasha and Tina from My Wardrobe HQ, whose website says, "Fashion is temporary, but our planet is not," that she found her home. And that brings us to today. Now the chair of My Wardrobe HQ and working with SmartWorks, who you may remember as being endorsed by Meghan Markle to help women back into work by building confidence through clothes. She joins me today from her home in Islington that she shares with her partner and miniature schnauzer, Dexter. Jane, welcome.
Hi, Jessie. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
It's lovely to have you on the podcast. We've got some questions that we'd like to ask you, and it's amazing where to start really with such an illustrious career. You've really have done it all, Jane. So something that I wanted to talk to you about is, you've had so many successes. What are some of the things that you think people seem to misunderstand about the successes that you've had?
Well, I think one of the things that people think about me that just isn't true is that I'm this sort of very tough, steely sort of character. But I guess because I worked with Philip Green and perhaps I stood up to him, whereas in fact I'm not at all, and I'm not even that confident particularly. I just realised very early on that you could pretend to be confident, and if you did it well enough, then people would believe it. So that's what I did, and I guess one of the things that helped me weirdly was that I didn't actually suffer imposter syndrome with Philip, because it was so clear from the start that he was the imposter and not I. He really knew nothing about the fashion industry, whereas I'd sort of been in it all my life and worked my way up through it. So that was kind of helpful, to have somebody who knew so little, and I knew so much. So I think that gave me the additional confidence. But I'm not one of these sort of super tough, steely women. I'm probably as tough as I have to be, but no, that's a misapprehension I think that a lot of people have.
It's really interesting to hear you describe that sort of tough, steely character. Anybody who's familiar with with our negotiation workshops will be familiar with the concept of the clock face, where you identify the most appropriate behavior to get the outcome that you want. And it sounds like you sort of faked it to make it in terms of that steely character, or adjusted your behavior appropriately to get what you needed out of Philip Green in those scenarios, all backed, as you said, with superior knowledge.
Indeed, that's very, very well put. I did. I adopted my own personality, but one that I knew would work, I suppose. And I suppose that's what one does. That's what one does throughout one's career.
Now that you're in a different phase in your career, do you think that you're adopting a different style?
I think I'm much more myself now. I don't feel that I have to. I don't feel that I have to sort of put on this sort of steely exterior anymore. I can just be me, and my own personal style actually is I'm a middle child, for goodness sake. Middle children are there to sort of keep both sides happy, and I think that's what I tend to do, and that's certainly my negotiation style, is to really make sure that both sides get something great out of the deal. And so yeah, I guess that's probably how I act nowadays, which is quite different.
It's really interesting that you reference that. As the eldest child, I might have to go and speak to my middle sibling and ask them whether they feel the same way about being a middle child. But it's nice to hear you describe that you're able to kind of bring your personal style now that your career has moved in a totally different phase.
You have less to prove, perhaps, when you've been around for as long as I have. And you just sort of think, well, this is what I am. If you like it and you can get on with it, that's great. And if you don't, that's too bad in a sense. But I'm really not a difficult person. I don't think. I mean, God, you might interview someone who worked for me and they'd say she was a horror. But I think probably not.
I think probably not too. We've only spent a short period of time together, Jane. Thinking about this career that you've had, I mean, taking Topshop from 10 million all the way through to 100 million, working with very different types of brands in the last time of your career. What do you think is the most important thing you've learnt in that career time? And I suppose, what was your career like before you learnt it? And then what do you think your career's been like after you've learned that lesson?
Yeah, I thought about this for a long time, actually, because this is one of the questions that you asked me the last time we met. The thing I have learned, and that's been absolutely crucial to any success I've had, is that it takes a village to raise a child, or it's a community. It's a team of people that make something work. And I realized, I think before I realized that, when I was a buyer at Topshop, I was very competitive. I felt that it was kind of my job. It was all down to me. I had to make this work. I was very self-reliant. And I think when I got to the position where I was actually running the show, I realized very quickly that I needed to surround myself with the most talented people who were much, much better at the job they were doing than I would ever be. People that I really admired and looked up to. And I realized that actually, if I had all these people in these positions around me, that we could do anything. We really could, and if I allowed these people to be what they were, to be as great as they were, then there was kind of no stopping us. And it was a wonderful moment when I realized that, and also that actually it requires much less from me. All it requires from me is sort of making sure that all of those sort of different functions are broadly moving in the same direction. And my job then became one of motivation and sort of building enthusiasm and passion, which is something I realize I'm actually quite good at. So I kind of allowed all of these people to be brilliant, and they were brilliant. And I've never looked back. I now think that the team around you is it's everything. It's absolutely everything. It's also the enjoyment. There's nothing more enjoyable, I don't think, than having a creative team around you, people who have sometimes very different skills, and a very different way of acting, but together you can create this thing that's bigger than the whole, if you like.
I really love the way that you've used that example, that phrase that we all know, it takes a village to raise a child, and the comparison between your earlier career as a buyer. I can relate to that, Jane, having spent 10 years in buying myself. It's very much that highly competitive environment, and arguably you may not have got to that role had you not have had that highly competitive streak in your earlier career.
I think that's very true, very true.
But you had to adapt and change your style quite dramatically from being that self-focused, competitive person, arguably more on the left-hand side of the clock face, and change into how you could create the more explorative and creative and motivational solutions.
Absolutely, I did realise that I'm still quite competitive. Don't get me wrong. I still love to win, but I actually love to win more if there's a team of us getting there together than doing it on my own, I think.
Out of my own curiosity, how did you balance that fear factor around thinking it's my job to find the best people I can possibly find, the people that can do things I can't do, all of that talent, the way you've just described it? How did you balance that fear factor around that?
It's a hard one to answer, and I don't really know. I think I was actually just very lucky that these people sort of came and presented themselves, and I realized very, very quickly how talented they were and how much they could help us to get where we needed to get to. So, and I also think, I was a lot younger then. I think you have not the naivety of youth, but I think you sort of, things happen and you don't realize how lucky you were at the time that this just happened to you, that you didn't have to go out and sort of, make it happen or sort of force anything. And you also didn't worry about it not happening or not working, because you didn't really even consider that, I suppose. And I think that's quite a good way to be in a way.
It's really inspiring to hear you describe it in those terms. I mean, you describe it as being the naivety of youth there, Jane, but I'm sure it's all something that any of our listeners might reflect on, that idea of bringing in the best possible talent and nurturing that talent and thinking about how that can really create the most creative and dynamic teams, whether it's in negotiation or just leading a business as a whole.
Yeah, I think the thing is not to be threatened by brilliance, and to recognize your own limitations as quickly as you possibly can. And as soon as you've recognized your own limitations, that then allows you to really see how other people can kind of add to the whole kind of team dynamic, if you like. I realized very, very, very early on that there was absolutely no point in being threatened by these people, but that these people could achieve incredible things if they were given the space within which to do so, and they did. And what I love as well is the totally different skill bases that people have. I mean, especially I'm a more creative person and perhaps a bit slapdash and like to do things quickly. But I really, really appreciate people who set up these incredible critical paths and get really involved in all of the detail and make sure that every single part of it is carried out in the very best way it can be. That's not me, but I really, really appreciate having those people around me, because it's the combination of our skills that creates something incredible, and without that you don't get it.
I couldn't agree more. It's being able to identify, what roles you need within that team to really maximize everybody's skill set, whether you're using color insights, whether you're thinking about all of individual skills. It's lovely to hear you describe it that way. You're now the director of the London Fashion Fund, which provides ethical and responsible capital to start up fashion businesses? You know, I know that it has a particular focus on material science, for example, which is about driving innovation, like the example I saw was hydroponically grown cotton. Your mother was a scientist, and despite considering yourself not the academic of the family, here you are pioneering science that might turn around the industry that you love.
You know what? It's funny you should say that, and it is actually something I had never thought of. But as soon as you mentioned it, I thought, yes, you're right. I do see. I very much see science as being the answer to so many of the problems that we're facing at the moment. I mean, particularly, climate change and how we're going to change the industries that we work in, so that we're not doing things that are as damaging as they are at the moment. And yes, the science part of it, to me, is kind of the obvious answer. It's yes, growing cotton hydroponically is one thing. One of the businesses I saw made clothes that photosynthesize as you wear them, which means that they obviously collect the carbon from the atmosphere and they emit oxygen. And a T-shirt that they created can use up as much carbon as a 100-year-old oak tree. So there's amazing things that are happening. Yeah, I call it the material science side of things, which I think it probably is. There are microbes that can be persuaded to weave a fabric that feels a lot like leather. I guess, which is quite similar from lab-grown meat products. It's just a different way of using these microbes. So I think that is really, really exciting. I'm less interested, to be honest, in sort of fashion brands who are using organic cotton, but they're still trying to sell a lot of product. And so much of it will end up in landfill. In fact, at the moment, I'm on a rule of 5 where I can only buy 5 items of clothing this year, just to try and sort of motivate other people as well to really consider every purchase that you make and make sure that things you do buy you're absolutely going to love forever and keep in your wardrobe and wear with everything else. So I'm interested in changing behavior, but I'm kind of also interested in the science side of things as well. I think there's lots of different ways that we can approach this.
Well, as soon as we stop this record, I'm going to demand that you bring down and show me what the 5 items you bought last year are, so that I get that inspiration.
Can I actually just say this is my first year and it's only
okay. You have to let me know how it goes.
I'm on 0 at the moment, but it's not long.
Yeah, it's maybe a 1 in 1 out policy, or donating to charity and things like that. It's really clear that this is something that inspires you, and clearly, it's an industry that needs to make some big changes. If you were thinking about where the industry has come from, in the time that you've been working in it, and where you see it going, are there any recommendations that you would like to give to the people starting out right now in that world?
Well, I see a lot of very, very small businesses who are right at the beginning of their journey, and what kind of keeps me going is the incredible sort of enthusiasm that they have, and the belief that we have to change. There is no choice in this matter. We have to change, and I think it's listening to those people who understand that completely, who are trying to find just different ways for the whole industry to sort of to react, I suppose. I think it's just accepting that change must happen, and possibly accepting that the capitalist model doesn't actually work, or it isn't compatible with ensuring that the planet survives. And if that isn't compatible, then we need to find a new way of doing things. And I don't know what that is yet. I wish I did. I don't know what it is, but all I do know is that it's going to be very, very different from what it is now. So my advice would be is to keep a very, very open mind, to really explore all of the different ways that you can do things, that things can be done, and you know, and to stick to your beliefs. If you think you're right, if you think you found something that's going to work, stick with it and really try and sort of push it. I mean, it's hard to get investment. I won't lie. It is hard to get investment in this area, because a lot of people just sort of think, you know, sustainable fashion is what do you mean? It doesn't exist. Fashion is fashion and it's unsustainable. But I think, you know, we do all need to wear clothes, and if we can find ways of making clothes and not buying quite so many of them, in a way that's more environmentally responsible, then that's where we need to move to. But I think it's going to come from. The combination of new ideas, of certainly science helping us to find a way out of this, but also huge behavioural change. There's no question. You know, we can't. We have to move away from what fast fashion has become now, which is sort of literally some people never wearing clothes that they bought and just throwing them away, and fashion brands advertising a bikini for £1. You know, I mean, that item has no value whatsoever. You know, the person that made it hasn't got paid properly. The person that grew the cotton hasn't got paid, but you know, it doesn't work. It's totally unsustainable.
It's interesting that you're describing, you know, not only the change, you know, at a capitalist level there, Jane. We'll tear the system down from the inside, shall we? It's interesting you describe not only that change, but of course the consumer change. So we're not just talking about businesses changing the way they operate. We're talking about a fundamental behavioural change in the way that the consumer actually demands and what they demand of their brands. So it's a
very difficult one, and for women in particular, women are the biggest culprits here. You know, so many women have low self-esteem. So many women feel that buying something new will make them feel better about themselves, that it will make them into the perfect person. You know, and I don't escape that myself. I feel that, you know, I feel if I bought that trench coat, I would suddenly look like the most professional, you know, perfect woman that I could imagine. It's difficult, but we need to find a way around this. We need to. I'm not sort of. I don't think that one should use the stick instead of the carrot. I think you should try in some way to find viable alternatives that are as attractive as what we're currently doing, and whether that's through certainly vintage and secondhand and repairing things are all becoming, and rental of course is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. You know, which allow us to still enjoy fashion as sort of a creative entertainment, as we have done before, which is important, I think.
Thank you for being so open with your insights of how you would change this industry that you clearly still love. All these years in this industry, you're clearly so passionate about it, even if you're only going to buy 5 items from it this year. Does that I'll ask you later whether that includes vintage or not, or secondhand.
No.
Sure there's a loophole.
No
loopholes. It's 5 in total. Okay, that is pretty impressive, Jane. You've talked about, you know, not being threatened by brilliance, building these really strong teams, and the way that your own personal style has changed over the years, and this need to be open-minded to innovate. How would you describe now your sort of most successful negotiation style, do you think? Just to leave our listeners with the final thoughts of what your most successful negotiation style.
Okay, I would say I will always enter into a negotiation considering what each party wants to get out of it, with a view to both sides coming out of it with the best possible option. I always like to think that if I negotiate with somebody, they leave the negotiation thinking, yeah, I did really well there, and hopefully that I would also feel that I'd done well. I think my style is that I rely very much on enthusiasm and passion for what I want to do. So much so that I suspect that perhaps people get a little bit caught up in the enthusiasm and the passion and don't want to disappoint me. And perhaps I say that because that's actually something that my husband's told me recently, which did make me think, well, maybe I actually do. That's a deliberate thing that I did. Not deliberate, but I think perhaps that allowing people to see how much I care about something will help me to be able to put my point across in a way that they will then be able to accommodate it, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's whether it's tactical or, as you said, whether this is something that you do naturally. You're showing them that that by working with you and that passion, that they're going to get more out of it because
Yes.
How much you care, you're motivated as much as they are. And I love what you just said there. And I hope that one of the things that we teach is how do we want the other party to feel at the end of the negotiation? Satisfied. And you've just summed that up absolutely beautifully with, yep, I've done well.
Absolutely. I mean, if they're not happy, then we've all failed, haven't we?
I couldn't agree more. Well, hopefully our listeners will be satisfied with what they've learned from you today and the knowledge that you've imparted. So thank you so much for dedicating this time to this. And I look forward to finding out what those 5 items are that you're going to have in your wardrobe, Jane. Thanks very much, and we will catch up with you soon.
Thanks so much.